The telephone, one of the world's most revolutionary inventions, probably rivaled only by the computer in paving the way for modernity and unprecedented technological growth. As with radio, the history of the telephone is an interesting and complex one and has been ascribed to different inventors. We tend to think of it as a fairly recent development, but the concept of the telephone and telecommunications in general actually go back thousands of years. In fact, it might be shocking to some to find out that there is a 1,200-year-old phone on display in the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. But before we delve into antiquity, let's first take a brief look at the more recent recorded history of telecommunications. As we know, Alexander Graham Bell is generally credited with the invention of the modern telephone, but in actuality, Italian innovator Antonio Meucci is acknowledged as inventing the first version of the telephone in the mid-1850s. It says here that Meucci studied the principles of electromagnetic voice transmission for many years and was able to transmit his voice through wires in 1856. He installed a telephone-like device within his house in order to communicate with his wife, who was ill at the time. Some of Meucci's notes, written in 1857, describe the basic principle of electromagnetic voice transmission, revealing that it consists of a vibrating diaphragm and a magnet electrified by a spiral wire that wraps around it. The vibrating diaphragm alters the current of the magnet. These alterations of the current, transmitted to the other end of the wire, create analogous vibrations of the receiving diaphragm and reproduce the word. Unfortunately for Meucci, he lacked the funding and business acumen necessary to bring his version of the telephone to full fruition. As a result, Bell became the first to obtain a patent for it in 1876. The phone systems of Meucci and Bell were electromagnetic, and as such are the direct precursors of the modern telephone and cell phone. However, the electromagnetic telephone was actually preceded by a mechanical acoustic version. It says here that before the invention of the electromagnetic telephone, mechanical acoustic devices existed for transmitting speech and music over a greater distance. This distance was greater than that of normal direct speech. The earliest mechanical telephones were based on sound transmission through pipes or other physical media. The acoustic tin can telephone, also known as the lover's phone, has been known for centuries. It connects two diaphragms with a taut string or wire, which transmits sound by mechanical vibrations from one to the other along the wire, and not by a modulated electric current. The classic example is the children's toy made by connecting the bottoms of two paper cups, metal cans, or plastic bottles with tautly held string. Some of the earliest modern experiments with mechanical phones were conducted by the British physicist and polymath Robert Hooke from 1664 to 1685. An acoustic string phone made in 1667 has been attributed to him. However, Hooke's mechanical phone invention is not the first of its kind. During the very early Middle Ages, about 800 years before Hooke, a similar type of communication device was developed in Peru by South American Indians known as the Kaimu. The Kaimu culture arose around 900 AD and developed the kingdom of Kaimur. Their capital city was Chan Chan, translated as Sun Sun, a sprawling mud brick complex, the largest such adobe site in the world, and it was the largest city in pre-Columbian South America. Chan Chan was almost 7.7 square miles and was inhabited by 100,000 residents during its height around 1200 AD. The entire city was made from shaped and sun-dried mud and was elaborately decorated with sculptures, reliefs, and wall carvings on almost every surface. The Kaimu maintained the largest and most important political system in Peru before they were eventually conquered by the Inca around 1470 AD. But so impressive was the Kaimu high culture that the Inca absorbed much of it into their own cultural substructure. This included the Kaimu political organization, irrigation systems, and road engineering. The Kaimu telephone device, described as an instrument, is composed of two gourd tops bound with a length of cord. The gourds, each 3.5 inches long, are coated in resin and act as transmitters and receivers of sound. Around each of the gourd bases is a stretched hide membrane. The 75-foot line connecting the two ends is made of cotton twine. This one-of-a-kind artifact reportedly predates the earliest research into telephones, which occurred between the 1600s and 1800s, which also began with non-electric string devices. As it says here, the Kaimu are known to have been a top-down society. It stands to reason that only the elite or priest class would have been in possession of such a valuable instrument. The precious telephone, with its seemingly magical ability to channel voices across space to be heard directly in the ear of the receiver, was a tool designed for an executive level of communication. There might have been many applications for this old phone, such as communication between novices or assistants and their higher-ranking elites through chambers or anterooms. No face-to-face contact would have been needed, preserving status and ensuring security. Like many other ancient marvels, such as those in ancient Greece, the Kaimu telephone might also have been a device to astound the faithful. Disembodied voices emanating from a handheld object might have shocked and convinced people of the importance and station of the upper class or priests. Considering the age of the phone, it appears that it developed very early on, and therefore may have potentially played an important part in the development of the Kaimu civilization. Other forms of the acoustic telephone include what are called voice pipes or speaking tubes. When we consider that all that is needed for a basic acoustic telecommunications system is two or more substructures or cavities tuned to the same resonant frequency or harmonics, and a connecting conduit between them, then we can conclude that this conduit could be not only made of wires, cords, or ropes, but also pipes and tubes. The article here says that early voice pipe designs consisted of two cones of wood or metal, one end shaped to fit the speaker's mouth, connected to the other, which was flared to amplify the sound, specifically to match the impedance of the tube to that of the open room. A pipe with a larger internal diameter was desirable for longer runs, as the signal loss is inversely proportional to the pipe's cross-sectional area. Later designs of the voice pipe inserted a removable cork-mounted whistle. This whistle could be sounded by blowing into the tube from the other end. On naval vessels, this created a distinctive sound associated with an urgent intra-ship communication. The sound of the whistle would summon the listener, who would then remove the whistle and answer the call. Speaking tubes have long been common within buildings as well as on board ships, and they are still in use today. The basic design consists of two cones connected by an air pipe. In most commercial pipes or tubes, sound is carried up to 300 feet or more. While its most common use was in intra-ship communications, the principle is also used overuse in grand affluent homes and offices of the 19th century, as well as expensive automobiles, military aircraft, and even locomotives. The picture here shows an example of speaking tubes being used in an office before the invention of the electromagnetic telephone. The tubes are located on the end of the desk. But as with acoustic telephones, these voice pipe conduits also go back to ancient times. One example is the Mayan ball court, in which each end has a raised temple area. Even a mere whisper in these raised areas can be heard over a 500-foot distance from one end to the other. Also incredible is that the sound waves are unaffected by wind direction or time of day or night. So as we can see, the concept and technology of telecommunications can be traced much further back in time than is generally acknowledged. One might wonder if these ancient principles of the voice pipes and acoustic phone inspired Hooke, Meucci, Bell, and others either directly or indirectly. But even if not, this would still mean that similar principles were independently discovered centuries later, and by implication centuries earlier, by many different societies. In other words, there's nothing new under the sun. And it is another clue that the ancients knew of many of the same principles and were in some ways just as advanced as we are, but simply employed these principles in radically different ways. As mentioned in the video, Ancient Advanced Lighting, this suggests that we shouldn't expect to see exact duplicates of our own modern-day technology in ancient times, and hence shouldn't write off the possibility of advanced ancient technology just because it does not remind us exactly of our own. The acoustic telephone in particular has been referenced not only in South America, but also in India and China. And so this particular technology may have a history even as long as the acoustic stone structures. And if that is the case, it is highly possible that the acoustic phone saw much innovation and development over time than is apparent with the Kaimu phone, as it is highly unlikely to have been the only one of its kind. In fact, with numerous such acoustic phones, a rather complex communication network could be made from or made with a vertical intersection post, as shown in the diagram. Here, several people could listen into one person speaking as long as all the lines are taut. But for more private calls, there will only be a need to introduce slack into the non-active lines. This slack will greatly attenuate the acoustic signals, while the taut line would allow the impulses to travel through, relatively unmitigated, to the active receiving diaphragm. The addition of an operator and control box could make the system even more complex and versatile, but likely will have only been available to societal elites. But as amazing as the discovery of the Kaimu artifact is, there is implication that the basic concept of the telephone goes back even further in time. It says here that the kahunas, the native priests of Hawaii, believe that telepathic messages are sent directly from one person's solar plexus to another. According to the priests, the aka, or etheric body of one person, sends out a finger or thread of aka substance to the solar plexus of another. This sticky substance connects the two like a silver spider web. Telepathic messages are sent out along these threads. After the instinctive or low self receives the message, it relays the information to the rational or middle self, where it rises in the mind like a memory. When repeated contact is made, these threads eventually become braided into an aka cord, which creates a strong telepathic bond between two people. This telepathic bond could be seen as two people becoming more attuned to each other so that maximum psychic energy can be transferred over time and space. It goes on to say that the African Bushmen communicate in a similar way. As anthropologist Bradford Keeney discovered, the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert believe that all living creatures are connected by a silver stream of energy that extends from one belly button to another. The Bushmen use these horizontal lines, like telephone wires, to send and receive telepathic messages. Hence, we can see that the basic concept of the telephone actually goes back to distant antiquity, as telepathy is essentially the metaphysical version of the telephone. And so we may wonder, what came first, the concept and practice of telepathy or the concept of the telephone? We could readily see the possibility of the physical telephone as being inspired by the metaphysical concept of telepathy. But could the physical instead have inspired the metaphysical? For those who believe in ancient advanced proto-civilizations, such as Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu, perhaps the latter is also feasible, as such advanced cultures most certainly would have developed methods of communicating over large distances. According to author Shirley Andrews, the Atlanteans employed the energy from many different sources to fuel their technology, including heat, sound, and light. And concerning light in particular, it is worth mentioning the photophone, an invention also developed by Alexander Bell. It was even considered by him to be more important than the telephone. History might agree with him, as the photophone is a distant precursor of modern fiber optics. The photophone is a telecommunications device that allows transmission of speech over a beam of light. It was invented jointly by Bell and his assistant, Charles Sumner Tainter, in 1880. The brightness of a reflected beam of light, as observed from the location of the receiver, therefore vary in accordance with the audio frequency variations in air pressure, or the sound waves, which acted upon the mirror. In its initial form, the photophone receiver was non-electric, solely using the photoacoustic effect. Bell found that many substances could be used as direct light to sound transducers. Lampblack or powdered soot proved to be especially efficient. One experimental receiver design, employing only a deposit of lampblack, produced an audible tone from a modulated beam of sunlight as a test signal. Bell described it as painfully loud to an ear pressed close to the device. But in its ultimate electronic form, the photophone receiver used a selenium cell photodetector at the focal point of a parabolic mirror. The cell's electrical resistance, with outer ranges between 100 and 300 ohms, vary inversely with the light falling upon it. In other words, its resistance was higher when dimly lit and lower when brightly lit. The selenium cell took the place of a carbon microphone, which is also a variable resistance device, in the circuit of what was otherwise essentially an ordinary telephone, consisting of a battery, an electromagnetic earphone, and the variable resistance, all connected in series. The selenium modulated the current flowing through the circuit, and the current was converted back into sound by the earphone. Now we know that light is electromagnetic energy, and so we might propose a variation of the photophone in which the electromagnetic telluric energy within ley lines could be modulated to send signals just as light can be. According to some investigators, telluric lines connect many of the world's megaliths, including the pyramids, which sit on nodal or antinodal points, or what are called power spots on the world energy grid. Stone structures such as pyramids are essentially giant crystals. And so if these megalithic structures are in direct contact with lines or power spots of telluric energy, then perhaps resonating those structures can modulate the incoming telluric currents, which can then be picked up by other structures in tune with the first. In this case, The ley lines or grid lines will replace the pipes or cords as vibratory conduits. This would potentially enable messages to be sent over a much larger region in a way similar to a telephone exchange or modern cell tower. Resonant structures or even sensitized individuals could pick up signals carried within these lines. Of course, this particular system is highly speculative, but the possibilities are fascinating. Earth batteries, of course, make use of telluric energy, so attempting to use it to transmit sound without additional external electricity would be an interesting experiment, which I may attempt in the future. An alternate system could make use of the piezoelectric effect. Here, a large crystalline structure could be resonated, which would generate electrical currents. These currents would travel a distance, perhaps superimposed over telluric lines, to another structure which is in harmonic resonance with the first. The piezoelectric effect would then transform the signal back from electrical vibrations to mechanical vibrations, just as with a piezoelectric buzzer or speaker. Even if the frequency response of such a system is ultimately inadequate to fully replicate the complex pattern of speech, it could still be more than adequate for a Morse code-like system. If such ancient communication systems did in fact exist based on electromagnetism, acoustics, or even the telluric energy within ley lines, then is it also possible that they eventually gave way to what would be considered more psychic, internal, or sensing methods? Even today, we are envisioning computer biological interfaces between implants and our brains and nervous systems for hands-free interactions with external machines and even the sending and receiving of messages. The latter, which would be considered a type of electronic or technological telepathy. Some people have even had small magnets surgically implanted within their fingertips so that they can sense magnetic fields. A type of biohacking. But if we think about it, we're already born with natural implants in the form of magnetite crystals located within our pineal glands and other areas of the body. This means that we already have the potential to interact with electromagnetic and acoustic vibrations, as magnetite is both magnetic and crystalline, and therefore has both electromagnetic and vibrational properties. Perhaps these abilities could be awakened within us through highly specialized training. What if the concepts of sensing via the laying on of hands, telepathy, clairaudience, etc., are actually remnants of a very real biological technology in Antiquity, where the human organism was the ultimate form of technology? Even concerning concepts such as levitation and moving objects at a distance, both of these feats can be achieved through the power of sound. The human voice can express an incredible range of frequencies and amplitudes when it comes to sound, and has often been described as a miraculously complex musical instrument. We can see undeniable evidence of this in how opera singers and other trained vocalists can shatter glass goblets via prolonged resonance matching by voice alone, a feat which requires acoustic amplitudes in the range of about 100 decibels plus. Many ultrasonic transducers used in acoustic levitators, by contrast, produce sounds in excess of 150 decibels, while 165 decibels is the level calculated to levitate the average human. But as explained in the video, I suspend all gravity with a wire. Raw power is not the primary ingredient in levitating and moving objects with sound, but rather very precise frequency matching, though adequate power is still a necessity. But what if we could find a way to develop personal vibration amplifying devices, which could give these already natural abilities of the voice even more power and range? Portable devices could be developed which could amplify our voices to the needed thresholds to move and levitate objects. Needless to say, adequate ear protection would be a valuable accessory. But the audio frequencies could even be accelerated into the ultrasonic range, which would render the high amplitudes a moot issue while maintaining the acoustic forces. Could such devices enable us to exert practical forces over a distance in a type of acoustokinesis? Theoretically, we could even learn to selectively move an object by sensing and then vocalizing its particular resonant frequencies or chords. A similar scenario is mentioned in the book Atlantis, Insights from a Lost Civilization by author Shirley Andrews. According to her research, the Atlanteans regularly employed vibrations from the vocalization, the stamping of the feet, as well as group mental power to move and raise heavy objects. Atlantean engineers allegedly perfected powerful gongs, which supplemented and eventually replaced these vibrations, although the group mental component remained a vital part of this incredible process. This amplification, techno-interface concept has been reflected even in science fiction. One example is the delightful episode, The Squire of Gothos, from the original Star Trek series. In it, the obnoxious squire, known as Trelane, displays a vast array of superhuman powers. In the attempt to defeat him later on in the episode, the main characters speculate that he is aided by an incredibly sophisticated energy-to-matter conversion machine that is revealed to be hidden behind a mirror and which is controlled by his brainwaves. This mysterious psychotronic-like device magnifies his already incredible mental abilities. Today we are seeing an emergence of similar technological concepts in the real world. Principles which, if successful, will result in the human organism itself becoming the ultimate technological interface. If similar concepts and technologies did exist in the distant past, which allowed people to interact with their environments without direct physical contact, then perhaps our current biotechnological endeavors are simply bringing us full circle, from the telephone to literal telepathy. And though it sounds cliched, perhaps there is some truth to the adage that there's nothing really new under the sun. So what do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned.